as well. And Ann Carmichael is with Leela, and she is going to be leading our FAFSA completion workshop and answering some questions about financial aid planning. So whenever she's ready to jump on, she can begin.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm presenting this evening on behalf of Leela, who is Louisiana's nonprofit resource for FAFSA completion and college access. We have been in the business for some time. We don't have all of the answers because it seems that the rules do change from year to year, but we are always available. Oh, thank you for letting that parent in. We're always available to answer any questions that you have. And if we don't have the answers, of course, we will find someone who does. As people are still continuing to enter the room, I'm just going to wait a few seconds.
Hi, everybody. Thank y'all for joining us. And I've introduced Ms. Carmichael from Leela, and she's going to be leading this session. We're both recording it. So, you know, I'm sure that one of us will have a good recording to share after this is all over.
Okay, I'm going to be covering the financial aid process. Now, if you have questions as I go through the presentation, just drop them in the Zoom chat box and we'll discuss them at the end. I'm not going to take up too much of your time, but I am going to be available after the session to work with you individually if you'd like. Now, I know that everybody is already looking for their colleges. You're doing your college searches. There are a lot of options that you have, but we just want to make sure that you all are preparing for the costs of post-secondary education. And these costs are going to include equipment, books, and supplies, your personal expenses. Students are living away from home, so they may have some additional expenses they need to be prepared for. Room and board, which if you're living on campus will include your dorm. Off campus, perhaps you're living in your own apartment. And then tuition and fees. Now, when you're searching your college's websites, most often you'll see their tuition listed, but you're not always aware of these hidden fees. They can include parking, library, technology, and athletic fees, and they do add up. But the good news is that financial aid is available from the U.S. Department of Education, the state of Louisiana, your college and career schools, and then nonprofit and private organizations. We know that in 2020, more than $115 billion in federal student aid was awarded, and we just want to make sure that the class of 2022 receives their portion. There are three types of student financial aid. There's the free money, borrowed money, and then your earned money. Now, types of financial aid from the U.S. Department of Education include the federal Pell Grant, the federal Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant, the Teacher Educational Assistance for College and Higher Education, or TEACH grant, the Iraq and Afghanistan Service Grant, federal work study, and then direct subsidized, unsubsidized, and plus loans. Federal student aid grants are a form of financial aid that does not have to be repaid, so you never want to turn down a grant offer. The federal grant family includes Pell Grants for undergraduates with financial need, the FSEOGs for undergraduates with exceptional financial need. Service grants are for students of military parents who died defending the country following 9/11, and then TEACH grants for students pursuing a teaching career. The Federal Work Study Program provides part-time jobs to help students pay for their education expenses. So when you answer yes on the FAFSA to Federal Work Study, the Financial Aid Office will begin considering you for available jobs on their campus. Now, the earnings from these jobs will be paid directly to the student and should be used to pay their college expenses. I want to stress that these jobs look great on a student's first professional resume. So if you're going to a four-year college and you say work in the financial aid office for the four-year period, that is 4 years of work history that you have to show on your resume. Now, no one wants to have to borrow, but if you can't complete your college degree without student loans, then they are a good investment. The important thing to remember, however, is to borrow only what you need to complete your education. And it's important that you understand the different types of loans that you could be offered. The direct subsidized loans are based on financial need, and no interest is charged on that type of loan until the student graduates or ceases to attend. On the other hand, almost everyone is eligible for the direct unsubsidized loan, regardless of financial need. But the important thing to remember is that interest does begin to accrue on these loans each year after the loan is fully dispersed, and then throughout the life of the loan. So you can see that there is a big difference between the direct subsidized and unsubsidized loans. When you receive your student aid offer, you want to remember to always accept the subsidized portion first. And you can remember that by telling yourself that the U in unsubsidized means that you always pay the interest on that loan. Now, if you do make the decision to accept loans, you always want to accept the federal student loans first, because payments aren't due until you graduate or cease to attend. The interest rate is fixed at a lower rate and no credit check is required. These loans are in the student's name only. On the other hand, if you're offered private loans, you need to consider that some lenders are going to ask that you begin payment on that student loan while you're still in school. The interest rate might be variable and it's often much higher, and they almost always require a cosigner. So make sure you're doing your research before selecting a private loan lender if you're going to borrow. Now, all of these monies can be used at four-year public and private colleges, community colleges, career and technical schools, for part-time classes, and to take online courses. And all federal student aid and most institutional and private aid is contingent upon completion of the free application for federal student aid, or FAFSA. Now, the FAFSA did launch on October 1st, and it does so every academic year. We encourage students and parents to submit the FAFSA as soon as possible, because the money is often awarded on a first-come, first-served basis. You want to remember to pay close attention to and meet all of the FAFSA deadlines that are going to be set forth by your college, by the state of Louisiana in the form of the TOPS scholarship. And yes, the FAFSA can serve as your TOPS application, and it does have a deadline to submit the FAFSA. Federal student aid has their own deadline as well. So make sure that you're making note of all of these deadlines. Students and parents need to begin the process by collecting all of the documents that they're going to need to complete the form. And if you have these documents in front of you, it really should take no longer than 30 to 45 minutes to get your FAFSA submitted. Now, those documents are going to include the student and parents' social security cards, because you must report your name and number exactly as is printed on your most recent card. The student and parents' 2020 federal income tax returns, if you filed one. If you don't have a copy of this return, you'll want to go ahead and contact your tax preparer now for a duplicate copy, because it's important to have this information right in front of you as you're submitting the FAFSA. And I'm going to tell you why in just a minute. The student and parents should have their 2020 W-2s, if they receive them, because there's information on this form that might not be found on the federal tax return. And then bank statements and records of investments, because you're going to be asked to report the balances of these accounts as of the date you submit the FAFSA. You want to begin by creating the Federal Student Aid ID, and the web address is listed here. And this ID allows the student and parents to identify themselves electronically when accessing all federal student aid websites, but specifically the FAFSA. Now, the FSA ID will consist of a unique username and a password that's created by you, and it should reflect only your personal information. Each student and one of his parents should create their FSA ID. And remember, use only your personal info and don't share information. Students, don't use mom or dad's mobile phone or email address in your ID, and vice versa with parents. And please use your personal email addresses. And parents, same for you, because once you leave school, you might not have access to your school email. Students and mom and dad, occasionally federal student aid communications will get blocked in your spam folder.
And I just want to interrupt you for 1 second, just to stress that students and parents have to have separate FSA IDs, FAFSA IDs. And that's a point of confusion sometimes when FAFSAs are being filled out. So I just wanted to reiterate that.
Yes, that's true. And you also, it's important to state that if you're a parent who has submitted a FAFSA for yourself, maybe you were in graduate school recently, or you have an older child, you will use that same FSA ID for each child that you have in college. Now, the Federal Student Aid ID is your official electronic signature, and it's legally binding. So you want to make sure that you're recording it and keeping it in a very safe place, because you're going to need it every year that you submit your FAFSA. Now, if you don't have access to a computer when you're ready to begin your FAFSA, go ahead and download the FAFSA mobile app. It's called My Student Aid, and it's really easy to use to submit your FAFSA on your mobile phone or any other mobile device. As a matter of fact, we saw a lot of parents and students on the FAFSA website on October 1st, and there were some outages. And we encourage those students or parents to go ahead and get on the mobile app. For some reason, it's a little bit more stable when the web-based version is overloaded. Now, if the student prefers the mobile app and mom or dad prefer the web-based version, then that's fine. All the information is going to be integrated into one form when it's time to sign and submit. As I mentioned, the web-based version is available at fafsa.gov. Now, you want to begin the FAFSA with the student's FSA ID, because the FAFSA is the student's application for federal student aid. The parent FSA ID will be used later on in the process if this parent chooses to transfer his tax information from the IRS and drop it directly into the FAFSA, and then it will be used to sign the student's FAFSA. It's also important to remember that the high school class of 2022 should complete the 2022-2023 FAFSA, because that's the academic year that you're applying for financial aid. If you select the 2021-22 FAFSA, the student will be considered for financial aid for this academic year. So unless you are going to be attending college or university during the 21-22 FAFSA, you need to make sure that you're completing the 22-23. Once you're in the FAFSA itself, you'll see that there are 8 sections that need to be completed before submitting the form. And the information that you use to create your FSA ID must match exactly what you enter in the FAFSA. So your name, your social, your email address and mobile phone have to match what you have used to create your FSA ID. Let me go back a minute. The different sections, as you can see, the 8 different sections will include the student demographics, where students will be asked to provide their social security numbers, names, date of birth, email address, home address, residency status, and gender. Next is the school selection section, where the student will list his high school, the colleges that he wants his FAFSA data to be sent to, and his housing plans on each of those college campuses. Next is the dependency status section, where the student will be asked to consider a list of 10 questions that will determine whether he is a dependent or an independent student for FAFSA purposes. He'll be asked to report the number of dependents living in his household and his student's education completion level to determine whether he is a first-generation college student. Next is the parent demographic section, where parents will report their social security numbers, their names, their marital status, their email addresses, and then you move on into the parent and student financials, where each of you will be asked to report your working wages from 2020, any federal benefits you've received, and information and balances about your savings and investment accounts. Then it's time to sign and submit the FAFSA with your FSA IDs. And once you do, you'll receive a confirmation that that has been done. Now, as you move through the FAFSA, you're going to see a question mark beside every FAFSA question. Click on it if you need a more detailed description of what they want for the answer. You can also use the hyperlinks that are provided. You can request a FAFSA online chat or call Federal Student Aid or Leela's FAFSA helpline. But for this session, I'm going to cover only the most commonly asked questions. However, as I mentioned, if you have a question about something I don't cover, please drop it in the Zoom chat box and we'll talk about it at the end of the presentation. Now, the student must be a citizen or eligible non-citizen to complete a FAFSA. However, if his parents are not, that's fine. The student can submit his FAFSA, but he will use zeros anywhere a parent's social security number is asked for. Only the colleges that you list on the FAFSA in the school selection section are going to consider you for student financial aid. So you'll want to add all of the schools that you're considering. Even if you haven't completed the admissions process yet, go ahead and add them to your FAFSA. You're going to be able to add up to 10 colleges at a time. And if you're planning to apply to more than 10 colleges, there are instructions in this section to do that. If you would like some assistance adding those additional colleges, you can contact me at that time. And then I want to briefly go over the 10 questions that the student will be asked to consider. Remember that they're asking these questions of the student. Will you be 24 or older by January 1st of the date that you're applying for, of the year that you're applying for financial aid? Are you married or separated but not divorced? Will you be working on a graduate degree? Do you have children who receive more than half of their support from you? Do you have dependents other than children or a spouse who live with you and receive more than half of their support from you? Are you currently serving on active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces for purposes other than training? So this is going to exclude boot camp and basic training if you're going on to the military after graduation. Are you a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces? At any time since you turned 13, were both of your parents deceased? Were you in foster care, or were you a ward or a dependent of the court? Are you an emancipated minor, or are you in legal guardianship as determined by a court? And it's important to note that legal custody is not always considered legal guardianship. So make sure you have your documentation with you so you can take a look at it as you're completing your FAFSA. And then the last question, are you an unaccompanied youth who's homeless, or are you self-supporting and at risk of being homeless? Now, if the student can answer yes to just one of these questions and provide a legal document supporting that claim, then he's considered an independent student for FAFSA purposes and will not be required to provide parental information. Now, if you're not in legal guardianship and say you live with grandparents or other relatives who have not legally adopted you, you still must provide information about your legal parents. You never want to provide information about grandparents or your legal guardians or anyone else that you might be living with at the time. You do need to provide information about your biological, if they are your legal parents. And for FAFSA purposes, you're not considered independent simply because you may file your own taxes or say you've chosen to live alone and you support yourself. Unless you can answer one of the prior 10 questions, you do still need to provide information about mom and dad. And then the most commonly asked question that we receive is, who is my parent when I complete my FAFSA? And the rule of thumb is that the parent or parents that you've lived with the longest in the past 12 months should be listed on your FAFSA. Now, if you live with both of your biological parents, and that's simple, you list both of them on your FAFSA. But if the parent you lived with the longest in the past 12 months is either separated, divorced, or was never married, then you should list only that biological parent on your FAFSA. Unless that parent is now remarried, then you need to list your step parent as well. Because federal student aid is trying to determine the financial standing of the household that the student has lived in the longest in the 12 months prior to the date that the FAFSA was submitted. Now, if you are identified as a dependent student, but your parents will not cooperate by providing their parental information, you can always submit your FAFSA saying that you're unable to provide it. But it is your responsibility to contact the financial aid office to work with them independently. Because the FAFSA is really just a vehicle to gather your demographic and financial information and provide it to your college financial aid offices. Then the financial aid counselor will work directly with you to determine your aid. So if you're in this kind of a situation, it's good to work independently with your financial aid counselor because they might be able to determine some additional financial assistance for you to complete your academic year. Now, to expedite the processing of your federal student aid, the student and parents should use the IRS data retrieval tool to provide their income information if you filed a 2020 return. Using this tool is going to greatly diminish the student's chances of being selected for verification by their college. And this is a choice for parents and students to use this tool, but I will tell you that if you do not use the IRS data retrieval tool, you will most probably be asked by all of your colleges to go to the IRS site, request a tax transcript, and send to each of those colleges. So this will save you some time. If you do choose to use the tool, you'll be taken directly into the IRS website. This is why I'm about to tell you why it's important to have your tax document with you. You need to make sure that all of the information that's listed on your 2020 tax return is what you're entering in the IRS site. They want to know that the person who filed that return is the person that is in their website. So say, and we've had this happen before, that your tax preparer has misspelled your name, or maybe you've moved since you filed your 2020 return. It can be as particular as wanting you to spell out street or avenue, if that's what's on your return, or abbreviating it if that's on your return. So make sure you have it with you, and you should be successful with the retrieval of your information. Now, if you are having trouble using this tool, it is most often because the information that you entered on your FSA ID does not match what you've entered in the FAFSA. Sometimes students will create their FSA ID with their school email address, and then in the FAFSA, they're using their personal email address, or say they have several email addresses. This is going to prevent you from signing your FAFSA and from using this tool. So always go back if you're having a bit of trouble and check your FSA ID and the demographic sections as well. And now you're almost finished with the process. But before you submit your FAFSA, I'm going to encourage you to review the student aid report. This is a list of all of the questions that you're asked within the FAFSA and your answers to each of them. So this is your last chance to check the accuracy of your FAFSA before you submit it. As we mentioned earlier, once you get to the sign and submit section, you'll see that the student will be asked to electronically sign with his FSA ID, and the parent who created an FSA ID will be asked to electronically sign the FAFSA as well. Again, if you're having trouble signing, go back and check out your IDs and make sure all the information is correct. Now, once you do submit your FAFSA, you're going to receive a pop-up confirmation page. And this is so very important because this is the only time you're going to see all of this information in one place. And it's going to be the only time you see one or two of these items. You'll see your confirmation number and the date you submitted, so that if the colleges tell you that they haven't received your data, you can give them your confirmation number. I received a question about this over the phone today. The data release number. This number is only shown here on the confirmation page. If a student is asked to make FAFSA corrections or needs to do so before his aid is processed, instead of having to go back into the FAFSA and make those corrections and wait the 3 to 5 days to process the form, he can provide this data release number to the college financial aid counselor, and they can make those corrections for him. You'll see the next steps that you need to take to complete the financial aid process, a list of colleges that you are sending your FAFSA data to, and you can review your estimated expected family contribution and take a look as well at your financial aid estimates. Remember that the estimates on the confirmation page are just that. Federal Student Aid is going to pass on the results from your FAFSA to the colleges, and they are the ones who are going to make your financial aid offer. So make sure that you're either printing this confirmation page or taking a screenshot of it for reference. Now, once your FAFSA is fully processed, which I mentioned takes from 3 to 5 days, at that time it's going to be shared with all of the colleges that you've listed. Then each college financial aid office will begin to identify any aid that you might be eligible to receive. Now, as I mentioned, you can add your FAFSA, all of the colleges that you're considering to your FAFSA, but most often colleges are waiting until the admissions process has been completed before they will contact you with your aid offer. Now, if you want to add a school or change your contact information, or perhaps the college has asked you to make FAFSA corrections, there are a variety of ways to do that. But the quickest is to go ahead and log back into your FAFSA, make those corrections, but always remember to sign and submit each time you make a correction to your FAFSA. If your family's financial situation has changed since 2020, contact your college financial aid office, because they do have the ability to adjust your aid offer by using what is called professional judgment. So if you've had a loss of income, a layoff, maybe some unexpected medical expenses have been incurred, contact the financial aid counselor there. Just like your high school counselor, they are there and willing to help you through the financial aid process. And they might be able to offer you some additional financial aid to help you through your academic year, because they're trying to determine your net price. And they're going to do that by subtracting any grants and scholarships that you're eligible for from your cost of attendance on their campus. That net price is what you, the student, and perhaps your parents are going to be responsible for paying, either in cash or by accepting student loans to help you pay that balance. Now, your student financial aid offer is going to reflect the college's cost of attendance and line item any grants, scholarships, work study, and student loans that they can offer you. You want to make sure that you're reading these offers carefully and responding to any requests that the school might have for additional information. And remember that you're going to receive a separate financial aid offer from each of the schools that you've listed on the FAFSA. Once you do determine the college that you are going to attend, you always want to accept your financial aid in this order. Scholarships and grants first, because this is gift aid that doesn't have to be repaid. Federal work study next, because you've earned this money and you don't have to pay it back. And then loans, because this is borrowed money that you will have to repay, most often with interest. I know that you're probably already looking for scholarships. You've begun your search. You know that scholarships are gift aid that don't have to be repaid. And there are thousands of them, literally thousands, offered by colleges, your parents' employers, private nonprofit organizations, religious groups. Some are going to be merit-based, awarded on your academic achievement, and others will be based on financial need. So continue your search, because applying for and winning these scholarships is going to reduce the cost of your education, which bottom line is going to reduce your student loan debt. This year, Leela offers a $1,000 FAFSA completion scholarship for seniors attending a Louisiana high school, and a $1,000 Choose Louisiana scholarship For those of you who will also attend a college in the state of Louisiana. And you can find out the details of those at lila.org, or you can email me and I'll be happy to send you the applications. Now, for students and parents who need additional assistance paying for their education after they've exhausted all opportunities for grants, federal and state dollars and scholarships, Lila does administer a nonprofit education loan program called Lila Choice. And you can find out details about that at lilachoice.org. And then remember that you must submit a FAFSA every year you're going to college. So if you do your FAFSA October 1 of this year for your freshman year, next October, you will receive a reminder from Federal Student Aid telling you that it's time to complete your next year's FAFSA. Now, I know this is a lot of information, but if you would like a copy of Lila's FAFSA completion guide for the class of 2022, it's free, and you can email me directly for a copy if your counselor has not already provided you with one. I want to now answer any questions that you might have about the process. If you'll drop them in the Zoom chat box, we can discuss them. And while you are doing that, I do want to provide you with our FAFSA helpline and my email address if you want to work with me independently after this evening's presentation. Has anybody already submitted their FAFSA? I actually already did. Although I'm not in college, I always like to take a good look at the new FAFSA. And for those of you who have submitted a FAFSA maybe in the past year or so, you'll be surprised when you get on the website because it looks totally different. And I never want to be surprised when a parent calls me at 7 a.m. on the day that the FAFSA is submitted saying, oh, we're having some issues here. So I always like to take a look at the FAFSA itself.
So Anne, I know that I'd seen some news articles about the FAFSA being shortened, and it was supposed to this year, but I believe you or somebody else told me that was actually pushed off. Is it shorter than it has been in the past?
It is not shorter, and there are a couple of things within the FAFSA this year, questions that, of course, financial aid counselors will no longer be required to consider. Like you might remember that young men used to have to register with Selective Service to be eligible for federal student aid. That requirement has been removed. However, there was no time to remove the question itself. So there are a couple of really kind of cosmetic and simple changes this year. I understand that the bigger changes are coming within the next year or two.
Another question, at LOSFA, at the LOSFA articulation workshop, I believe you said something about how stimulus checks, federal stimulus checks that people received due to COVID were not.
They are not, you are not going to be required to report any income from COVID stimulus, from really any COVID payments, whether it was a stimulus check that you received or any grant monies for your business. Those will not be reported. Thanks for reminding me about that.
I think we lost her. I think we lost Anne with Leela, maybe. Elizabeth, can you hear her? Because I can't. Okay. All right. I didn't know if it was just me.
Hey, can you hear
She ran
me?
away.
Okay, Anne, are you there?
I am here.
Okay, your sound cut out after I had asked about if stimulus money was going to have to be factored into the FAFSA.
And no, I don't know if you heard my answer or not. I was probably talking to myself. Stimulus payments will not be reported on the FAFSA, and also any COVID grant monies that people may have received for their businesses will not be required to be reported.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Just remember that we are always available to answer your questions. If you'll call the FAFSA helpline, or if you want to email me directly, I'm happy to work with you individually.
And Anne, I've told this to my families, and I explained everything in an email a couple of days before October 1st, but for families who know that they're not going to qualify for federal aid, and aren't likely to qualify for institutional aid, they can use the LOSFA application to apply for TOPS if their student is staying in the state and going to a Louisiana school, and so parents, I'm just going to redirect you back to that email that I sent last week about that, and I'm happy to answer any questions as well. And Anne, I don't know if you can hear us. I'm not sure if you're talking or not, but we can't hear you.
I'm listening. I'm learning
okay.
something too, so I'm just listening.
Okay, that was all I had to say. But Elizabeth, I think you're the only parent left. Did you have any questions? Okay, you're muted. I can't hear you. Let's see. Let me see if I can unmute you.
Okay, here I am.
Uh-huh.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Can you explain creating the ID again?
Absolutely.
I have one as well as my daughter, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
You have to have a separate one.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And when we initially start the application, which one do I use?
You'll use the student's FSA ID because it actually is the student's application for federal student aid. We have every year, we do have people that parents that do create FAFSAs in their own name, and then they get a confirmation that they submitted their own FAFSA. So it's always good to remember that the FAFSA is the student's application.
Okay. And on her application, can I put my email address?
You can use, I don't want to say that you should because I know there are privacy issues, but I'll just say this. As long as there's no sharing of information within the IDs themselves, the student can use whichever email address she needs to use on her ID. Just make sure that the parents is different.
So, Elizabeth, speaking as a parent, my daughter Hannah graduated from college already, but we did this 4 years in a row. Anytime there's a communication from FAFSA, you both get it. I think it would be wise for her on her application to use her phone number, her email, and on your FSID to use yours. You will both receive communication as that process is unfolding. So if you're worried about her not checking her email, it's going to be okay.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
Anything else?
I might have more questions, but I have the helpline.
Yes, absolutely. And, reach out to me, reach out to them as well. And Carmichael, thank you so much for this. This was very helpful, and we'll be sure to keep, using you guys as a resource. One thing I wanted to ask about was I guess the workbook or the, you said something about like the checklist. If your counselor hasn't shared it with you, I don't think I've shared that with them. So if you want to shoot me one of those, I would appreciate that.
I will absolutely do that. This is a workbook that we used to print every year. It's just gotten massive, and with budget issues, we are just doing it electronically. So I'll send that flip book to you, and I'll send you the PDF as well.
Awesome. I appreciate that. And I'll attach that with the link to the video to send out to everybody when I get it all together.
Great.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're
And thanks
welcome.
for joining us.
Thank
It was
you.
my pleasure.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, ladies. Good night.
Thank you.